I think I was 8 or 9 years old when my Auntie Lou came over one night. In my wife's family, the title of auntie is given to anyone within the family sphere, whether they're related by blood or not. But that wasn't my family's custom growing up. Auntie was reserved for a very select few family friends. So as a child, being told by my parents to call someone auntie, I knew right away that this was a very special person in our family. Auntie Lou worked as a teacher, the kind of teacher who was always teaching and always listening, but not just in the classroom. The kind of teacher who would stop her lesson and say a prayer with the children when they heard a siren go by outside. The kind of teacher who conversed with her students the same way she spoke to adults. I remember clearly that night she came over. She came to see my sister and I, and not my parents with whom she was friends. She had recently learned that neither my sister nor I had ever seen the movie E.T., the Extraterrestrial. Anxious to rectify this problem, she came over not only to gift us a copy, but to sit down and make us watch it with her right then. This is a spoiler-free homily, so I'm not going to take you through the plot points of this 43-year-old movie. But the reason I invoke the memory of Auntie Lou is because of E.T.'s heart. As a child, on that first watching, I found that image of E.T.'s bright crimson heart pumping lifeblood, glimpsed through translucent alien skin, equal parts creepy and intriguing. Auntie Lou reassured me, "Don't worry, Danny. The heart is how E.T. communicates." I looked up a little confused. "You mean the heart does the talking?" "Yes, but it's deeper than that. A little bit of Elliot lives in E.T.'s heart, and vice versa. And that's how I feel about you and your sister. We will always have that connection." Where do our connections between spirit and flesh begin and end? Both in ourselves and in our relationships. Through Lent and Holy Week, we focus on death and new life. Do we vacillate between literal and metaphorical meanings of resurrection? Do we always mean both? I said this was a spoiler-free homily, but that's not entirely true because tonight Bach will preach to us not just about the journey, but about what happens at the end of Holy Week, about the resurrection of Jesus and new life for all. That's okay. I think it's counterproductive to pretend we don't know how the story ends in Holy Week. Our journeys through wildernesses, both physical and spiritual, are stronger and more fulfilling when we know that our story must progress at some point, when we know that change must come. It may not be as facile as darkness yielding to light. It may not be the same journey that Jesus undertook. But we might have a journey that begins and ends in darkness, but with a new perspective, with a renewed ability to communicate with God through others. The ability to share with those around us, share our loneliness, share our trauma, our addictions, share our doubts, our resilience, our compassion, our joy. We just heard St. Paul's words, "It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a physical body, it is raised a spiritual body. Just as we have borne the image of the one of dust, we will also bear the image of the one of heaven." And I'll add, if we choose to. Our journey can lead us to more connections, more communication, but it begins as a personal journey. Jesu meine Freude, Jesus my joy, was written in 1723 in Leipzig. There's healthy debate behind the reason for this composition and its first performance. It was likely written for a funeral or possibly a graveside interment. It's unknown whether it was initially offered with instruments or without, which is why you see such flexibility in the presentation of this piece. Large choirs, chamber groups, church choirs, solitary organ, strings, trombones. I've even heard of an outdoor performance that was accompanied by bagpipes. Yikes. Regardless of the approach, this piece is a serious challenge to the musicians who take it on. You can ask any of our choristers here tonight. The piece tonight is categorized as a motet and not a cantata. If you're a Bach Vespers regular, you know that a typical cantata opens with a big choral movement and winds through several arias and ends with a big chorale that in Bach's time the entire community would have sung together. The cantatas were written with a specific Sunday in mind, but the cycle of Bach's motets is much smaller and were written for reasons lying outside of the church calendar. They engage the choir on a much bigger, deeper scale. And tonight's motet is Bach's longest by a wide margin. Bach has set every verse of the Johann Franck hymn text here. And the Johann Krüger melody is always very close to the surface. It's obvious that Bach had a real affection for the source material. After 1723, Bach never again returned to this hymn in his compositions. Craig Smith, the late music director of Emmanuel Music in New York, suggested this was not because Bach exhausted all exploration into the hymn for this motet. He just simply had no more to say. Jesu meine Freude is nearly a musical palindrome. The outer movements are the unaffected hymn tune in 4 parts. One step inward gives us 5-part choral texture, both movements in the same key and meter. Beginning and ending lead to and radiate from the middle movement, a dense but lyrical 5-part fugue, culminating with a pointed and deliberate homophonic adagio section. Some scholars believe Bach wrote this all at once, intending each movement to fit into a specific part of the pattern. There are other musicologists that suggest some of these movements were recycled from earlier works of Bach, a process that we know he often employed. Further research suggests individual movements may actually have been performed as standalone pieces. Regardless, none of these theories changes the effectiveness of this motet as a cohesive piece of music that takes us on a journey. The poetry for this piece is taken from 2 sources. Bach alternates these sources, movement after movement. The odd verses are that Johann Franck hymn, a hymn that acts as a constant reminder of God's love for us, a reassuring paean of trust and safety. The even verses are excerpts from St. Paul's letters to the Romans. These are the transformative verses. We begin with the dwelling of ourselves in Christ, one body. There is nothing condemning those who are in Christ. In the 4th movement, just before the middle, the sopranos and altos set up the transformation. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ has set us free from sin and death. And then the 6th movement, the middle of the palindrome, the 5-part fugue. This is the hinge of the music and of the transformation. You are not of the flesh, but of the Spirit, since the Spirit of God lives in you. So we travel from the idea of being one in Christ's body to the Spirit of God and the risen Christ dwelling in all of us. The bass section is going to help us out for a moment here. I want you to have a listen to these 2 short excerpts, one from the 2nd movement and one from the penultimate movement, sister movements in the palindromic structure. Pay special attention to those moments of melismatic singing. That is, moments when the basses are singing multiple notes on one single syllable of text. And the second one. Thank you, basses. The first excerpt, the side that focuses on Christ's body, draws out the word wandel with melismas. Wandel, to walk, something we do bodily. The second excerpt from the other side draws out the word wohnet. Wohnet is lives or dwells, as in Christ's Spirit which dwells in us. Opposite ends of the piece with very different textual focus points, yet using almost the same notes with a similar resolution or lack of resolution. Both parts, the walking and the dwelling Spirit, moving like incense, weave us up through a rising melody, and both times end on an unresolved dominant seventh chord. Very different texts, but connected by the same hymn tune, part of the same story. I've said several times that this piece takes us on a journey, and that's true. Perhaps we've been thinking of that journey like our Holy Week journey, something like this. From one point, up and down the palindrome, to another point. But the more I listen to this music, the more I think the journey looks like this. From one point to the same point, but from a different perspective, where we can see the whole circle we have traversed. The choir will make these changes in what we call choral agility. It's the ability to affect their tone, volume, breathing, and character, changing on a dime. But the change really comes to the singer and the listener and is more meaningful when we remember that all we came through to arrive here. Tonight may be the first of many Holy Week observances for you. Or some of you may not be back until Easter Sunday, or perhaps some of you won't return until our next Bach Vespers. It doesn't matter, because just beneath the surface, that beautiful music is a message of change. A changing journey that is not exclusively about Holy Week. A change in perspective that may allow us to connect to Christ's Spirit in our hearts and in the hearts of those around us. I think this motet helped those mourners back in 1723 in Leipzig realize how connected we all are through Christ's sacrifice. How the person who died still dwelled in their hearts. It's a simple message, really. And it's the same message told to me by my Auntie Lou, by E.T. and Eliot, written about by St. Paul, and spoken by Jesus many times over, both bodily and spiritually. I'll be right here.